And Shawn is, okay, I'll just go ahead and kick this off. Unless Shawn's coming in too. Okay, I'm going to kick this off. So I've already introduced myself. Again, my name is Brian Easley. I'm the board chair, and I'm going to welcome you to the University of Louisville. If you're a Cats fan, there's nothing I can do for you. Sorry. I'm an alumnus from this institution. I've been active with World Affairs Council since 2016 in many different roles, and I'm very excited to have everyone here. I have the pleasure this evening to introduce a longtime ally, member and friend of the council, former city councilperson extraordinaire and current deputy mayor of Louisville, Barbara Sexton Smith. And she's going to deliver a few comments before she has to leave to one of her many other events.
All right. Thank you so much, Brian. Well, good evening and welcome to the fabulous historic University of Louisville. I'm a proud graduate of the 1979 College of Business class in its 25th anniversary. I'll let you do the calculations to figure out how old I am. I'm much closer to 70 than I am to 50. But I am here this evening to welcome you officially on behalf of the 51st mayor of the great city of Louisville, Mayor Craig Greenberg. And he sends his greetings to you. And also on behalf of more than 5,000 employees that work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, providing all the public services all throughout this great city that is home to more than 780,000 individuals. But also, you are sitting at the university located in the second city in the United States of America to be named a welcoming city and officially certified. And we are very proud of that. And yes, you may give us a big round of applause. We are also the home where we welcome more than 20 million visitors every year to this great city. And my husband and I, we are lucky enough to live right in the Central Business District, right in downtown Louisville, looking over the Ohio River. And what that means is we see almost all 20 million of those visitors each and every year, because we see them walking up and down, going to one of the 12 or 13 distilleries we have in a couple of blocks. We see them carrying the little tiny miniature Louisville Slugger bats, which we are so proud of. And then we also see them as they're carrying those gift bags from many distilleries. I focus on our bourbon trail and our bourbon history because we welcome our friends from South Korea, who is having an incredible growth in the bourbon industry as well. So we love to share that with you. Cheers, drink bourbon and drink lots of it together. September is welcoming month. So tonight at the stroke of midnight, we begin our 30-day celebration that is going to be led in this community by the mayor's director of the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. I'd like for Director Amos Izramana to please stand up so folks can see who you are. We're so lucky that Amos is here. Amos spent 12 years of his life in a refugee camp with his 11 brothers and sisters and his mother and father, and all of them stayed together, which is an incredible story, and made it here. And Amos, we're so proud of you, and we love the fact that you're leading our Office of Immigrant Affairs. The last thing I wanted to mention to our friends, especially those of you from South Korea, there is an incredible art exhibit, and it was first exhibited in 2022 in South Korea, and it was the Korea Fiber Art Forum. It became internationally renowned. The very first thing Mayor Craig Greenberg did after he was sworn into office on January 2nd is he looked around our beautiful 200-year-old Metro Hall where his office is, And he looked at me and he said, "Can't we do something better than this for the art?" And I said, "Yes, we can." And ladies and gentlemen and friends, the second time in the history of the Korea Fiber Art exhibit, for it to ever be exhibited, it was commissioned by Mayor Craig Greenberg, and it hangs in City Hall right now in Louisville, Kentucky. And we are so proud of that. And what's so significant about the Fiber Art exhibit is it tells the story of the human existence. And each piece that hangs in our beautiful hall tells a different story from a Korean artist perspective of living, from birth through life and through death. And why the fiber art? Because we are swaddled with the fibers when we're babies, and when we leave this earth and go on to places, depending on your belief and how you feel, my belief tells me we carry somewhere off on wings or flights of angels. We are shrouded in fiber at that point in our life. So we're thrilled that you're here, and all I wanted to say is together we'll create a great world where everyone can reach their full human potential. Let's grow bourbon, let's grow friendship, let's grow relationships, and here is to 70 more years. Thank you and welcome. Ryan.
All right, I'm going to be tasked with reading some biographies, so bear with me, and I will get this out of the way as quickly as possible. So, our Future of Korea speaker bios. Can everyone hear me? Okay. First, I'd like to, I'm not going to introduce them, they'll walk up later. Jennifer Stephenson is a Foreign Affairs Officer in the U.S. State Department's Office of Korean Affairs, where she manages U.S.-South Korea economic issues. Prior to joining the Korea desk, Jennifer worked in the State Department's Office of International Communications and Information Policy, where she coordinated U.S. digital economy policy for the East Asia and Pacific region. Jennifer joined the State Department as a Presidential Management Fellow, during which time she served at the U.S. Mission to UNESCO, the Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs, and the Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs of the State Department. Prior to joining government, Jennifer worked in broadcast journalism and media relations in Washington, D.C. and Beijing, China. She's the co-author of Careers in International Affairs, 9th edition, published by Georgetown University Press. Jennifer holds an MS in Foreign Service from Georgetown University and a BA in History from the College of William and Mary. At any time, if I butcher your bio, throw something at me. Troy Stangerone, it's Stangerone? Stangerone. Is the Senior Director and Fellow at the Korea Economic Institute, where he leads KEI's trade and economic initiatives, manages its relationships with Capitol Hill and the DC trade community, and serves as the editor for the Institute's main publication, Korea's Economy, and oversees its blog, The Peninsula. He is a respected authority on U.S.-Korea relations, South Korea trade and foreign policy, and North Korea, with extensive contributions to publications like Foreign Policy, CNN, CNBC, and more. Mr. Stangerone's insights have been featured in major news outlets, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Bloomberg News. He has also made appearances on TV and radio, including outlets like Bloomberg News and BBC Radio. Beyond his role at KEI, he is affiliated with the International Council of Korean Studies Board and the Korea-America Student Conference's National Advisory Committee. Additionally, he contributes as a columnist for the Korea Times and The Diplomat. Mr. Stangerone's rich background includes work on Capitol Hill, a 2012-2013 Council on Foreign Relations International Affairs Fellowship in South Korea, and an academic foundation with a Master of Science in International Relations from the London School of Economics and Political Science, along with a BA in Political Science and Economics from the University of Memphis, and which we had a discussion
We can talk about that later.
Tennessee, it's a thing. Ji-Hoon Kim is the chief of the congressional section at the Korean Embassy in Washington, D.C. Counselor Kim joined the South Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2003 and served in a variety of positions, including at the Korean Embassy in Mozambique, the Korean Mission to the United Nations, Bureau for North America, and the Office of the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. He was Chief of Sanctions and Export Control at MOFA, and Director for the Korean Peninsula at the National Security Office, and Director of the Task Force on Iran. Counselor Kim is also an author of a book titled Politics in the Fifth Committee of the United Nations, written in Korean. Counselor Kim received a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science at Seoul National University and completed coursework for the Master of Law program at the Georgetown Law Center. I'm now going to introduce my friend Shawn Dawley, who's the president of OT2 Consulting. He's a distinguished leadership educator, and keynote speaker with a mission to empower leaders of all levels to tap into their potential, passion, and purpose, which is exactly why we brought him to moderate this discussion this evening. With a background as a combat pilot, commander, and inspector general of the United States Air Force, including extensive global experiences, he later held director and vice president roles at Fortune 100 and nationwide firms. He also pursued education extensively, transitioning from a struggling high school student, I don't believe you, to earning a Bachelor of Science in Aeronautics, a Master of Business Administration, a Master of Arts in Political Science, and a Master of Arts in Military Studies. Having been a fellow at Harvard University, Shawn leverages his cockpit, combat, command, and corporate leadership expertise to integrate neuropsychological principles, guiding leaders towards becoming influential figures others willingly follow. So thank you very much, Shawn, for moderating this. Let's bring up our panel, and let's get this party started.
Well, good evening, everybody. Is the volume okay?
Yes.
Okay. So, given that tonight's talk is centered around the future of Korea, I thought that before we got into my meager questions, we would start by giving each of the panelists a couple of minutes to give us maybe like an immediate 5-year and longer term outlook across whatever spectrum you'd like to take it, political, military, economic. You know, where do you see the peninsula and South Korea specifically over the next future term?
I can, but I mean, they're really here to hear you and Jen, right?
We'll start with Ji-hoon. I'll settle that tie right now.
Thank you very much. I'm Ji-hoon Kim, and thank you for the introduction, Brian. Thank you. To make the long story short, I am a U.S.-Korea alliance lover. That's the way I can be introduced briefly. My grandfather fought during the Korean War, which took place, which broke out in 1950 for 3 years. And last year, everybody knows what's going on in Ukraine, right? So I know that we are living in a different world from before, but the stories of human beings remain to be pretty similar. So that's that's where I start my work here in Washington, D.C., and that's why I chose to come to Louisville, Kentucky, because I see so many similarities and so many great things about Louisville, Kentucky, plus so many connections between this city and the state of Kentucky with South Korea. Before coming here, I had a little chat with my military attaché in the embassy, and so to my surprise, I learned that 88,000 Kentuckians fought during the Korean War, just like my grandfather. And I don't know how many people you have in Kentucky, but 88,000 for 3 years, I think that's a pretty big number, right? And currently that's back in 2017, and I learned that about 19,000 Korean War veterans were still living in the state of Kentucky, which is a big number too. So I was surprised that, as a South Korean, so many Kentuckians are linked to South Korea in that way too. And I shared it with Shawn this morning, but when it comes to bourbon whiskey, as our director said, the first bourbon that was imported into Korea was back in 2000, and that was Evan Williams. And now when it comes to Jack Daniels, when it comes to Woodford Reserve, you can have them back in Korea. So for 23 years, the industry got bigger so much, so bourbon has become a household name back in Korea, which also connects me, a bourbon lover, to Kentucky as well. So I am looking forward to my trip tomorrow morning to Evan Williams, and thankfully to World Affairs Council, which organized that trip. So And with all plus, as it was already mentioned, Blue Oval SK, SK Innovation, that's a Korean company, made a huge investment. That's about $5.8 billion, along with Ford Motors, about an hour from here, and that's a battery park. I think the construction, it is already under construction. Maybe in 2025, you will be able to see the batteries coming out, EV batteries coming out of the park. So that's another story that is going on. A lot of Korean companies are increasingly getting interested in doing business here in the United States for a lot of reasons. But at the same time, aside from all the business-related trends, I want to put this I want to share this thing with you. Growing up as a Korean, America has been always a factor there. So you went to college and everything, and then you know that when you look into a society, there are four aspects usually: political, economic, societal, and cultural, right? And if you study or learn something in Korea, you gotta add American aspect to that Korean society. So that's the fifth aspect of the thing that you have to take a look at when you think about Korea. From Western movies to modern Hollywood movies, democracy, economic development, started from development assistance, call it official assistance back in the 50s, and even chocolate made in USA. These days, made in USA is not very much mentioned, but when I was growing in the early 80s, even in the early 80s, chocolate made in USA was something that you think about when you think about the United States. So that's how we grew up. And later, after the end of the Cold War in the early 1990s, we came to be living in the world where national boundaries mattered no more, right? So in the 1990s, when the Major League Baseball and the NBA, National Basketball Association, became global, Korea was in the center stage too. A lot of students grew up playing basketball. I was one of them too. So if you have a chance to play basketball, I'll be happy to play one-on-one. But at the same time, that was the 1990s, and then 2000s. Korea concluded a free trade agreement with the United States. And at the time, nobody believed in the possibility of a free trade agreement between the largest economy in the world, which is US economy, and the somewhat middle-sized economy, Korea. But personally, I was working on the team of free trade negotiation with the United States. For a year and a half, we had hard negotiations. And at the end of the day, April 2007, we finally signed the agreement. Actually, we signed it in June, but anyway, we concluded that agreement. After that, we had a couple of modifications, but at the end of the day, we came up with that agreement, and that's and that's the basis or the foundation of what we are experiencing, what we're going through these days. A lot of joint ventures, a lot of investments, a lot of research and development programs being done both in the United States and in Korea. And plus, from last year, we're looking at the change of world orders, starting from Russian invasion into Ukraine, and we all feel the need to work closely with friends in the world. For the United States, Korea will be one. For Korea, the United States is clearly the one. So we are living in that era. So I'm thrilled that so many people here living in Louisville came out here and to exchange views. So with that, I hope that we can continue to exchange views when we go into the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Jihan. So Jen, I'll next ask you, sitting on the Korea desk in the Department of State, what are some of those larger macroeconomic, international political issues that, from a strategic perspective, are shaping the viewpoint of the U.S. government looking at the peninsula 10, 20 years down the road?
Thank you, and it's a true pleasure and honor to be here with you tonight. I have enjoyed experiencing the remarkable hospitality, the people of Louisville. I felt very welcomed. I think I know now why, since you're officially a welcoming city. That's very self-evident. But yeah, wonderful to be here with you. I work, as I said earlier, on the Korea desk at the State Department, Washington, D.C., working on primarily economic issues, and have, over the past 4 years, even seen just a remarkable growth in our economic relationship with Korea, building on this FTA that friend Ji-hoon helped negotiate. We are working together on a broad range of strategic issues that I think are going to kind of continue forward in the years ahead as we look at the future trajectory for the relationship. Everything from working together, as you mentioned, foreign assistance. Korea used to be a country that received foreign assistance. Now it's a country that provides assistance to other countries. So we
Speak up a little bit.
Yeah, sorry. So we are working together in the Indo-Pacific region to promote prosperity and around the world on those issues. Obviously, the big elephant, I think, in a lot of these foreign policy conversations is China. So we are working very closely with Korea on supply chain security. So both through the CHIPS Act, the IRA encouraging more investment here in the United States in strategic industries. Korean companies are a huge part of that story. Korean companies like are all household names like Hyundai, LG, SK, obviously very well known here, and others. Samsung are a big part of now the fabric of the United States with investments around the country. That's a trend that we want to continue to encourage. We are working together to address the climate crisis. We've both made commitments to reduce our carbon footprint. We are working not only together but in Southeast Asia to see what we can do to create a greener world. The pandemic, that was another area where really the relationship that we have between our countries really became self-evident. In the early days of the pandemic, Korea, we were able to get PPE, test kits when it was very difficult to get these supplies from anywhere in the world. Korea, and even as a testament from the Korean War, which we were just talking about, donated supplies to Veterans Affairs to help veterans have access to PPE in those very difficult days in 2020. We then turned around and created a vaccine partnership with
Just
Korea.
a little louder.
Yeah,
Some of the
I'm
folks in the
sorry.
back, because they're looking at me, they're giving me the
I'll
evil
try
eye.
to put it maybe closer to my face.
Mike doesn't seem to work.
Is it not? It's probably just you cutting us off, but yeah, we went from kind of being a recipient of PPE from Korea to working with Korea to provide vaccines to other countries around the world. And then if you look at kind of other major global challenges, you're working hand in hand with Korea to address the situation in Ukraine. I think Korea is going to play an important role in terms of post-war recovery, economic recovery. They're already providing assistance, aid, helping with things like demining, non-lethal assistance to Ukraine. I sure hope we're not still in that situation 5 years from now, but definitely it's, we like to say that our allies are America's greatest asset, and I think the relationship with Korea is truly a testament to that.
Thank you, Jen. And so you just mentioned allies, and earlier you had mentioned China. So for Troy, being with the Korean Economic Institute, there's an interesting relationship on the peninsula whereby I think it's safe to say the United States is South Korea's strongest military ally. But South Korea's largest trading partner is China, which creates an interesting triangular relationship. So economically, do you foresee that South Korea will continue on that road to create bigger and stronger ties with China, or are they looking to diversify their economy and maybe disconnect somewhat from China?
Well, thank you, Shawn, and thank you all for being here tonight. It's great to see everyone, and I just want to echo what Ji-hoon and Jen said. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. You know, I think first I want to answer your first question, which is where will Korea be in 5 to 10 years? And I'll use 2 words, integral partner. And the reason I say that is, you know, Jen was talking about, and you all know Blue Oval and everything that's going on, but the broader reality is when we look at where Korea is going to play a role in the US economy, Samsung and SK Hynix are already critical semiconductor partners. Next to Micron, those are the 3 dominant memory chip companies in the world. And so we hear a lot about, like, you know, the processing chips from NVIDIA now with you know, their chips for AI, but all of those AI programs are going to run on Samsung and SK Hynix. They're called high density memory chips, and they're the only 2 companies in the world that make them. And without those, you can't do AI. So just as critical as NVIDIA is, Samsung is critical for AI along with SK Hynix. And when we look at, you know, the transition to EVs, the vast majority of the EV battery plants are being built, not just in Kentucky, but in the United States, are being built either in partnership with or by Korean companies. So as you go through a lot of the futuristic technology areas, Korea is going to be an integral partner for the United States, one way or the other. And so I think that's where we're kind of looking at Korea, you know, the next 5 or 10 years. But, you know, in regards to the relationship with China, after the Cold War ended and China began opening up to the World War, and the 2 Koreas both joined the United Nations, and then Korea formalized relations with China because they didn't until the 1990s. Slowly, trade started picking up, and they became, relatively quickly in about a decade, Korea's largest trading partner. And that makes sense. China's a large market, it's geographically close. So they had what often was referred to as a strategy of, you know, economic growth through China, security with the United States. And they followed that policy for a long period of time. But, you know, we talk now about de-risking and removing supply chains from China, and that's a big issue. I'd actually argue Korea was sort of subtly doing some of this beforehand. If you look at Samsung, for example, they years ago had moved all of the production of smartphones out of China to Vietnam. Part of this was, I think, there's a slow realization on the part of Korean companies that, you know, while China's a large market, while it can be profitable, the Chinese market also has challenges. China wants companies to come in, they want companies to share their technology with Chinese companies, but over time, they push those companies out of the market. So if you look at smartphones, right now, Apple does really well in China. Samsung used to be about 15 to 20% of the market. Now they sell about less than 1% of the smartphones in China. Now, there are Chinese competitors in the Chinese market that are make good phones, but the reality is that Samsung is the 2nd largest or the largest, depending on the year, cell phone or smartphone producer around the world. It doesn't make sense that they wouldn't have at least, say, 5–10% of the Chinese market. So there's lots of challenges I think Korean firms have realized over time, and we've seen them start to move out. You know, Hyundai and Kia, for all the success they have in the United States, since the THAAD issue, where, long story short, we deployed a missile defense system to South Korea to protect against North Korean missiles. The Chinese didn't like it, so they decided to punish South Korean firms. Hyundai and Kia haven't done well since then, and their sales have gone down. They used to sell over 1 million vehicles in China. Now they sell about 300,000 or less in China. So I think, you know, it's not just a question of de-risking from China, but it's a question of how do you strategically move things out of China? 1, to not be exposed to the Chinese market in certain key areas, but 2, to make sure you're competitive internationally. And so I think Korean firms have been sort of slowly working on this. And one of the things that's interesting, just to note, is there's a trend right now to where, depending on how the rest of the year goes, the United States actually might return to being South Korea's #1 trade partner by the end of the year. And if not this year, most likely next year will. So we're starting to see some of these shifts as well.
Okay, thank you for that. So before we turn it over to questions from the audience, I had one more economic question. Many of you probably know that South Korea has one of the most highly educated workforces on the planet. However, the birth rate has been extremely low for some time, and fortunately, life expectancy has continued to increase such that by 2035, there are predictions that the population will have peaked, and that not only will it decline, demographically, it will get older. So from a gross domestic product and economic output perspective, I'll open it up to anybody on the panel who'd like to ask, what would the implications for that be for South Korea, given that their economy is what you would probably call a service and an intellectual economy?
So, you're right on the demographics. So Korea has the lowest birth rate in the world, total fertility rate. For about the last 5 years, it's been below 1. Last year it was 0.8. Basically, you need 2.1, which is the natural replacement rate in a population. The United States is a little bit below that. I think we're at like about 1.7 right now or so. But this does have long-term implications. You know, a lot of Korea's future is baked into it, barring significant immigration. So what that means is that the children who will be the workers of the future have already been born, they're already in schools now, and that's a much less number than we had generations before. And so if you look out to say by 2060, by that point, the Korean population will drop from about 52 million people now to roughly about 28 million or so then. So you're talking about significant change. So what does that mean for the economy? So the good news is if you can increase the productivity of workers, you can take and maintain economic growth even with a declining population. If we look at South Korea, while a lot of people may think of Japan as the home of robotics and everything, in terms of workers, on a per capita basis, there are more industrial machines who are working in factories in South Korea than there are any other country in the world. South Korea has been investing in what apparently the World Economic Forum has started calling now lighthouse factories, but what Korea originally called smart factories, to where you used AI and other types of industrial innovation to not only make the factories more productive, but to also take and basically make them adjustable. So if you had something like the pandemic happen again, and you need a specific product made, you can quickly refocus that factory on that product rather than take and continue making what you were making or be forced to because you have to get new machinery. So Korea's been looking to try and take and deal with this. It's something that they've known has been coming because it's just simply a fact of reality. It's baked into the situation. But it does mean there's going to be stresses going forward. You know, the next decade or so, these won't really play out because the population will be relatively stable. It's really about 15, 20 years before they start hitting. But you're going to be dealing with, you know, larger healthcare costs, you know, retirement pension issues. So all of these things are going to hit. Now we've seen because Japan is further along the aging curve than Korea is, we've seen some European countries like Italy are further along the aging curve. There are ways to deal with this, and it doesn't necessarily mean countries are going to go into decline, but it does mean you have to be thinking about it and look at the policies you need to increase productivity in your workforce, to try and bring in more talented people, to remain on the cutting edge of technology so you can take and maintain some of your industrial advantages. And it means you have to start thinking through how do you deal with the transition into an older population where you're going to need more healthcare workers. You're going to need to spend more money on healthcare just simply because you have a larger population who, statistically speaking, is more likely to need healthcare than a younger population. So they have to deal with all of these issues.
Great, thank you, Troy. All right, so now we're ready to start taking some questions that some of you may have. I think somebody, Xiao Yen, has a microphone in the back, so if you'd like to ask a question to the panel in general, just ask it. If there's somebody in particular that you would like to answer to, just let us know who that is.
I have a question. The Secretary of Commerce just came back from China, and she was interviewed today on television, and one of the topics, of course, was the trade restrictions that we have with China, especially on AI and things like that, which is maybe only 1% of our trade with China. But what I'm wondering is, to what extent is this, are these restrictions coordinated with our allies in thinking of Korea in this case, of course?
I think that goes to the State Department.
It's called the Washington two-step.
No, thanks so much. That's a terrific question. And I'll admit I've been touring Louisville, so I didn't see our Commerce Secretary's comments on TV today. But I think, yeah, it was a tremendously important visit this week by Secretary Raimondo at a very important time in the U.S.-China relationship. We, I think, sent a clear message that We do not want conflict with China. We want a strong Chinese economy. It's good for the United States, it's good for the world. We're not encouraging decoupling from China. We have a policy of de-risking, which is a different approach. But at the same time, we're clear-eyed about the challenges that China poses, and we're going to protect our national security when it comes to potential misuse of technology or other ways that tools like AI or other things could potentially be used in ways that affect our national security or those of our partners and allies. We work very closely with partners and allies in terms of coordinating our China policy. We have regular conversations with, I can speak personally, I know with Republic of Korea on these issues. Korea has thousands of years of history working with China, obviously tremendous equities in terms of that relationship, highly trade-dependent economy. Things we do here in the United States have much broader effects, and we understand that. So that's why I think we benefit tremendously from hearing the perspectives of our partners and allies as we're formulating policies and trying to grapple with kind of this big challenge that is a challenge for the United States, but also for the rest of the world.
If I may add to what Jen said, the question the gentleman back there raised is a very interesting question. Because I worked in the Blue House, which is an equivalent to the White House of the United States, back in 2019 to 2021, what I can share with you is that if you are sitting at a desk in the Blue House or the White House, before you formulate a strategy to do something, one of the things that you do, for me, is to call my friend back in Washington, D.C. and see, give him my ideas and see what his reactions are like. And I try to incorporate them into my own thinking and come up with, with a broader strategy. And regarding Raimondo's visit to China this week, it has been a topic for the last several months, I can tell you this. Even though the specifics may not be shared, but the general direction, the U.S. has a tendency to share the general direction with the allies and the friends. And that's something that is not often covered in the media or in the press, but that's what's going on every day between, between friends in the Washington and Seoul. So that's what I would like to add, if I can give you a little bit color to what she has just said.
Well, thank you for that. Additional questions?
The last 60 years have been a remarkable economic story from South Korea. My question to the panel is, what's the special sauce? And if you can provide us some insight on that, and are there lessons for other countries that would like to emulate some of what South Korea has done?
So if we look at South Korea, or if you look at the Korean Peninsula in general, and Chris Padilla, who used to be the Undersecretary for International Trade and Commerce, would like to talk about this a lot. All the resources on the Korean Peninsula, the minerals, the coal that's there. There's only trace amounts of gas and oil, so neither Korea had access to that. But all of the mineral wealth and natural resources are in the northern half. But it's the South that's become the economic powerhouse. And I mean, Jun was being modest when he called Korea, a middle-sized economy and everything. It's essentially a top 10 economy in the world, and it's a high-tech economy. And when you look at Korean history, one of the things that was really emphasized was education and educating the population, because they knew the only resource they had on the peninsula was basically themselves. And we can get into a lot of different policies in terms of some currency measures they took to stabilize the banking system and to take and help grow exports. These things all played a role. Early on, they used to have, as much as this may sound like the government to the north, they had planning commissions that did 5-year plans on the economy. They took and did a lot of focus on how do you develop industry. And so one of the things that often gets overlooked is when Korea normalized relations with Japan, part of the agreement and understanding is that Japan would help Korea develop a steel industry, and that's now POSCO, which is one of the world's leading steel producers. And Park Chung-hee was the president, then basically pushed for Korea to move into more advanced industries and everything. And so this is how you get, the auto industry in Korea and other things. And so a lot of it was ambition. Nobody thought Korea could do a steel industry when they did it. Korea had approached the United States multiple times in the UN, and both had said, no, you're not ready. So it's ambition, it's about developing talent, it's about focusing on areas to where you can grow your economy and everything. This was a lot easier maybe in the 70s when there weren't a lot of export countries and you could identify things more easily. But to Korea's credit, they also have what's called the knowledge sharing program, to where they do try to take and work with other countries to help them develop and learn from Korea's own experience. And part of that is they also understand that Korea is unique. You can't simply take what happened in Korea and apply it to Indonesia or some other country in Southeast Asia or something. And so they are trying to work through that, and they try to take and bring a lot of the people who actually help the development process to meet with people from other countries. But at the end of the day, this goes back to what I was saying, education, hard work, and trying to identify what are the key areas and policies for the economy. And to be honest, one of the things I think gets underplayed is that if you look back in the past, there's stories, maybe they're apocryphal, but basically for companies that couldn't take and survive, they were willing to let them fold. You see this a lot of, because remember, Korea used to be an authoritarian country. A lot of times political favors help you through. Korea was much more, firm about this. Like, if you can't produce money, it doesn't matter if you have political ties. And so all of those kinds of things help them get to where they are today.
Thank you, Troy. Ma'am, you had a question, I believe?
Yes, yeah. Thank you. This is a very interesting discussion. Thank you all for coming. We've got a very rosy discussion going on about productivity, but then the last few comments were we have a shrinking workforce, we have an aging workforce, we have more needs for medical personnel, we have more needs for technically trained personnel, but they're not going to be there. So is Korea looking at importing people from other countries to come and work? We're looking at that here. You go to the doctors, and so many of them are now from India. And we have that same issue of having a losing workforce here and having tremendous needs that aren't being met. And I've got a second question to just throw in. We're not hearing anything about North Korea, and I'm just concerned about all these missiles going off and increased threatening positions coming, and where is that tying in, or is that just waiting to see what will happen?
Sure. So thank you for both those questions. So for the first one, I think she painted it nicely as a math problem, which it is, right? But Korea is 96% homogenous, and of the 4% that is not, it's a lot of that is like half Korean, etc. So the math is certainly one problem. Culturally, what would it look like if South Korea were to engage in a robust program to bring in immigrant labor at different economic strata? And then culturally, how would that assimilation play out?
That is a very, very good question. As Shawn said, it is pretty homogenic with mostly Koreans living in Korea for the last several hundred years. These days, with all the demographics changing, with the aging society coming in and everything, from like 10, 15 years ago, this is coming from my own experience and observations. So it may be wrong, but like 10, 15 years ago, I think people started to change their own perspectives against the foreigners. So before that, if you look at the history of the early 20th century, when Imperial Japan forcibly annexed Korea at the time, we have a tendency to look at foreigners as potential foes. But that started to change since maybe 1970s, 80s. By the way, in 1988, that's when Korea held the Summer Olympic Games, and that was kind of a starting point, a deciding point, I would say, tipping point, where our perspectives got wider. And from 10 years ago, 15 years ago, this new trend of debating, you mentioned importing, what is the correct term, like immigration, more open to immigration policy. That became a trend in Korea. Right now, as Shawn said, 4% or 1 million, over 1 million people are those from other countries, and especially from Southeast Asian countries, as well as Central Asian countries like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, these countries. So it is being changed, and it is changing. With the demographics becoming more serious problems in Korea, I think this perspective will gain traction and will certainly impact other societal policies as well. We are not there yet, but we are moving towards that direction. Plus, when it comes to immigration, look at yourselves, right? I'm in Louisville, Kentucky. A lot of people are coming from Korea too. This morning, I was surprised to see some of the Korean Americans actually working in Louisville. I never thought about it. Maybe New York, maybe Los Angeles. Yes, that's understandable. Louisville, Kentucky. We have 5,000 Korean Americans living in Louisville, Kentucky, if I'm right about the number. So that is what is happening. But what it means is that if you have those elements that can lure people from outside, you will have those people, this workforce. And I think that's what we have to learn from the United States. For Korea, we're gonna work on that. We can come up with, I'm confident that we will come up with some new strategies. But what was the second question, by the way?
So, and I know there's some
North Korea, yes,
yeah.
yes.
So yeah, it would be, I think, it would be moderator malpractice to get out of this discussion without talking about North Korea. So for the longest time, the South Korean Republic of Korea, specifically military, has maintained a large conventional force. However, we now live in a nuclear age where Kim Jong-un has a small arsenal of nuclear weapons and continues to test the capabilities of missile delivery systems. So, living in a nuclear peninsula, do you think South Korea will maintain its large and robust conventional military posture? Or do you think they may decide this may go nuclear, we may not need all these tanks, planes, and infantry troops?
You know what? The question is very serious, but my answer is pretty simple. When it comes to nuclear weapons, we turn to the United States. That's it. Yeah. So to put some flesh into that skeleton, what I would like to say is that for the last 70 years, we have lived under the constant threat from North Korea. And even when there was no nuclear weapon available or developed in North Korea, say before the 1990s, we were still competing against North Korea politically, economically, and ideologically. So with the weapons, what we came up was to coordinate more closely with the United States. So with those toys that Kim Jong-un plays with, I would say, ballistic missiles or nuclear arsenals. Last April, last April, when President Yoon of Korea visited the United States on a state visit, we came up with the Washington Declaration, and that creates a nuclear consultation group. So before that, we didn't have any mechanism to coordinate our nuclear posture. Our means bilateral or joint nuclear posture. But we came up with this declaration, which gives you the platform to coordinate on what strategy each country should come up with. Basically, as if I could go back to my original answer to you, basically Korea doesn't have any intentional policy to develop its own nuclear weapons. So when it comes to physical nuclear weapons, it's up to the United States. But when it comes to how to respond to such endangering, destabilizing actions of Kim Jong-un, we're gonna, constantly, every day, and consult with each other. So if I give you my own perception as well as my friends, peer Koreans' perception, we don't really feel threatened by all these harsh words and provocations coming from North Korea. As long as we maintain the military posture, I don't think Kim Jong-un can do anything with that nuclear weapon. Plus, we do have Mr. Rob Givens working in the district office of Senator Rand Paul. We also have Shawn, who served in the Air Force for 25 years. With his fantastic friends, we don't feel threatened at all.
We're in trouble.
We're getting old.
I know there were some questions in the back. Yes, sir.
Yeah, this actually was meant to be a follow-up to the question about the economic growth and the secret sauce. My memory, though, from sort of the 1990s and the Asian tiger phenomenon, but basically we had a huge economic crisis in East Asia at some point. And one of the things they pointed to about Korea was the structure, the corporate structure, and if I'm using the wrong terms, is like the Kaibols, the organization. So we had one attribution that it was a country that let non-performers fall by the wayside and a laissez-faire economic system, but that doesn't ring true with anything I've ever heard about the economy. And I'm curious, in the past 25 years since then, where obviously there's dominant global brands, which I believe clearly come out of some of those large corporate structures, the Samsung Group and some others. I'm kind of curious to know what the organization of the corporate structure in Korea looks like today, if it's any different than it was 25 years ago.
Troy, can you
Yeah.
start us off there?
So it is still the same, the Chable. So basically, it's like GE used to be, but they're now starting to sell off, where you have all these different divisions. And they did let things fail. In the 97 crisis, Daewoo's auto division went completely under. GM bought it. It's now called GM Korea, but it was GM Daewoo for a long time. They did make a lot of changes, though, in 97. Han Duck-soo, who is now the prime minister, actually was one of the people behind it. But as part of the bailout from the IMF, they had to take and implement different economic reforms. So they went through that process. But you still have Chable. There's a series of them who are the dominant ones. So the Samsung Group, the LG Group, the SK Group, the Hyundai, Kia Group, though they're not necessarily, they do shipbuilding and some other things, but they're probably less diversified than some of the others. The problem in the 90s was not that the companies were failing, but it's what you see these days. They had large amounts of corporate debt. Much of that debt is denominated in dollars, and if you have a currency crisis, suddenly debt that's serviceable isn't serviceable. Today, most of the Chable have lower levels of debt. They've learned, the challenges of this situation. So, that's been one of the fundamental corporate changes that's taken place since then. But we have seen on the digital side some new, I guess you wouldn't necessarily call them Chable, companies arise. So Kakao and Naver. Kakao is in finance and they do messaging and they do a lot of other e-commerce. I don't remember if they were able to keep the taxi app, but they tried to really become sort of this broad kind of like you would see here, like service company on the digital side. And Naver is the primary search engine. Actually, it owns part of Yahoo Japan, which is the largest search engine in Japan. So they've started branching out a little outside of Korea. But that's really sort of what we've seen. So it's not that in the earlier years, in the 60s and 70s, they weren't willing to let companies fail. It's just that they have that structure. It's persisted, but in the 90s, they were overly indebted. And then once you had the currency crisis, it put a lot of them under.
Thank you. Any other questions? Lots of hands going up.
As you were saying about the world changing and becoming more technologically connected, I was wondering that one of the biggest threats I think coming from the north is their cyber warfare and how that could affect the economy of South Korea. Is the United States working together with South Korea to help protect those markets and keep it from being as vulnerable towards any perceived attack from the north? Thank you.
Thank you. Jen, would you like to weigh in on that? And speak on behalf of the entire United States government? No pressure.
No, I think that's a great observation there, and absolutely, cyber cooperation is a very important and growing area of our cooperation. We have a cyber working group with Korea. I think there's commitments at the leader level that came out from the April summit between our presidents to work in this area, just in recognition of how significant of a challenge the DPRK poses. They're actually quite incapable in terms of their cyber abilities. In addition, from trilaterally, that's another from the Camp David summit that just happened recently in August. We're also looking to work trilaterally together on cyber issues. I know this is some of these emerging technology issues have been something that Secretary Blinken has prioritized as an area that the State Department needs to be focusing more on. We created a new cyber bureau recently, trying to elevate our attention on these issues in the bureaucracy. So we're obviously difficult challenges, but something that we're focusing on now.
Okay, thank you.
If I can add, so I know some other questions too. There are two areas where there is no concrete international norms yet, and that's one is cyber, the other is space. And these are the two future areas where a lot of people and technology and investment will come in. So when it comes to these two areas, the U.S. state, with the State Department in the center, is trying to garner support from other countries and governments, including South Korea, to come up with a rule or a norm that will govern the international cyber world and the space as well. So that's a new territory to work on. But at the same time, if you look at what's going on, say, she mentioned North Korea, Kim Jong-un, on the continuation of that question, Kim Jong-un earns like $3 billion, close to $3 billion, according to one statistics, $3 billion every year by hacking cyber money that is going around, which is not a small amount of money. And their normal trade has been cut off thanks to all these sanctions and everything. So that's the new area for him as well. So everybody is looking at this cyberspace. So that's the need. That creates a need for the countries, for example, Korea and the United States, to work together. And that's what we have agreed in the Camp David summit meeting that took place on the 18th of August.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Great.
Actually, I have just one other comment.
Yes. And did you have a question?
I thought it's maybe worth mentioning that something else we're involved with is trying to kick out cyber workers that are in other countries around the world doing gathering revenue that can support North Korea's nuclear and missile programs and doing other unwanted activities. So we're actually engaged in talking to foreign governments in third countries, trying to basically kick out North Korean workers, send them back home.
Okay. There's one up front here. And we're gonna have to make this the final question, but if you still have something you want to ask, we'll make sure we post on the website the room numbers of the hotel they're staying in. So if you wake up at 3 a.m. and you can't go back to sleep, you've got a way to get a hold of them.
Fortunately, I know you can't do that, but.
Yes, ma'am.
This is a follow-up on the Chable question. Just because Korea has that dynamic of, those massive conglomerates and these few key brands that are so diversified compared to other countries, moving forward, is that fostering creativity and innovation, or is it a hindrance?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. And before I forget, I also wanted to let everybody know, I left some copies of it out there. We do this with the East-West Center, And so if you want to learn more about how Korea impacts the United States and how we impact Korea, we have different data on trade, the military relationship, cultural exchange, things like cyber as well. So feel free to pick up a copy of this. And there's probably not enough for everybody out there, but I can give the World Affairs Council, Shawn, the website address for this too. So this is one of the, I think, the great challenges for South Korea, because, think about this. It's a country of 52 million people. You have these large firms that dominate certain industries. Sometimes you have a little bit of cooperation or competition. Samsung and LG both make consumer electronics products as well. So things like flat screen TVs. Interestingly, so China has caught up technologically on LCDs and now dominates the LCD market. But the OLED market is still dominated by Korean companies. But there are certain types of screens that LG is just simply better at making than Samsung, and so now they've partnered with LG to buy for their TV the LG screen. So you have sometimes competition like you had in that industry, but now it's becoming more cooperation. But really, for a lot of the Korean companies, they're not getting competition in the domestic market. It's really international, so competing with US firms or European firms or Japanese firms or now Chinese firms. And so that's really what's going to have to drive innovation for them. But it's going to be a challenge because, in the domestic market, they're not facing a lot of competition. In some industries, there is growing foreign competition, but they've been relatively safe, as well. If you go to Seoul, foreign auto sales have been growing, over the last couple of decades, but it's still predominantly dominated by Hyundai and Kia. I don't have the exact numbers, but it's probably still like 80%, now. So, that competition innovation is a real challenge. Now, the advantage Korea has is that Korea is very good at learning new things. So, I remember talking about maybe 5 or 6 years ago with somebody at Kia and asking them, are you going to make an electric vehicle? And they're like, no, we think there's still a lot of progress you can make on, combustion vehicles. And then the world started shifting more towards EVs. And suddenly, Hyundai and Kia both had EVs out. They're some of the best-selling ones. One of them, I think, is it the Kia model that got like the Motor Trend Car of the Year award or something? But one of them was, won a major award. So one advantage they have is even when maybe they're not being as innovative as they should in terms of developing new products, they are very good at seeing how the market is shifting and going that way. But this is a challenge because it's a small domestic market relative. They don't face the competition like a firm in the U.S. does or firm, the European Union does, because you have much larger domestic markets.
Thank you, Troy. That concludes our panel discussion. Xiao Yin or Brian, did you all have any concluding remarks before we?
Yes,
break?
I do. No, well, first of all, I want to thank our panelists. If you will all join. It's Korea and U.S. is kind of a big topic, so to tackle it in an hour is a challenge. So I appreciate all of your questions. Of course, you all brought up some really the key things. And if you didn't know this, Shawn had a lot more questions, and we looked at this and we're like, we can't possibly tackle all this. So thank you for all the questions that you posed, because you kind of filled in the gaps for that. We're very excited to be able to host this. This is one of the series, part of the Future of Korea, that's sponsored by KEI. They do this in different World Affairs Councils throughout the U.S., really bringing home the importance of Korea and U.S. relations and this allyship, if you will. So I know we have a lot of very important kind of Korean Americans in our city who work on all kinds of areas, whether it's business or nonprofit. So I'm happy that you're all being able to join us today. And we also had a great conversation this morning about the economic prospects. As you all know, you probably heard so much, and we talked about it with Blue Oval SK. They're going to be generating 5,000 plus jobs in one area of Kentucky. So those are really wonderful developments that we have. So I appreciate all of your comments, and thank you for bringing this kind of conversation to the World Affairs Council. And I know all of you, or many of you, are World Affairs Council members. If you're not, then you need to join us, because we do this regularly. We had this conversation saying that everybody around the world knows about the US, but not everybody in the US knows about the world, right? And so I think it's very much incumbent upon us, organizations like us, to really provide that space for people in the communities to really inform them of why it is so important that we are much more informed about the world as they are of us, especially now because we're in a very, very tricky time, right? The World Affairs Councils do this on a regular basis. So we have a series called the World in Transition Speaker Series. Every year we have a series of topics that we really like to focus on. And I was really happy to hear Councillor Kim mention 2 of those, which kind of the cutting edge of kind of that next frontier of international cooperation and conflict, which is space and AI, technology, cyber, and then also climate change, of course. I mean, these are areas that are very much emerging, unexplored. It's not very sophisticated, but very, very important areas. So we are working on putting together some programs in the coming months. Our next one is going to be in September 26th. We're going to be talking about climate change and conflict, really looking at the security implications of global warming and what that means from all around the world. So I hope you can join us for that. If you're not receiving our emails, make sure you sign up with us at worldkentucky.org. And I really look forward to seeing you again. Bring friends. Lots of them. Thank you so much.